The wine pitcher trembled in Sarah's hands as she crossed the great hall toward the man who had destroyed everything she loved. 3 months ago, the Lycan king's army had swept through her village like a storm. Her father, the minor alpha of a small, peaceful territory, had refused to bend the knee. He'd called it honor. He'd called it pride. He'd called it necessary. Now he was dead. Her mother, too. Her younger brother had fled into the mountains, and Sarah didn't know if he still lived. The village had been absorbed into King Caelan's vast territory, and Sarah, the only Omega daughter of a defeated Alpha, had been claimed as a spoil of war. Not by the king himself. That would have been too dignified an end. No, she'd been given to Lord Varen, one of the king's commanders, the same commander who had led the attack on her village, the same man who had stood over her father's body and laughed. For 3 months, she had scrubbed his floors, washed his clothes, and endured his casual cruelties. The slaps when she moved too slowly, the kicks when she failed to anticipate his needs, the way he spoke about her as if she weren't in the room, calling her the little Omega bitch to his friends. But tonight was worse than all of that. Tonight, Lord Varen had been invited to the Lycan King's winter feast, and he had brought Sarah along specifically to humiliate her. "You'll serve wine to the king himself," Varen had told her, his smile sharp as a blade. "Let him see what became of the proud Alpha's daughter. Let him see you on your knees where you belong." So here she was, crossing the great hall in a servant's rough-spun dress, her hair pulled back severely, her eyes fixed on the floor. The pitcher was heavy. Her arms ached. But she kept walking, because the alternative was another beating, and she didn't think she could survive another one. The hall was magnificent in a way that made her chest hurt. Soaring ceilings, roaring fires, long tables laden with food that could have fed her village for a month. And at the head of it all, on a throne carved from black stone, sat the Lycan king. She had never seen him before. In her village, he had been a distant threat, a name spoken in whispers. During the attack, he hadn't been present. He'd sent his commanders to do the bloody work while he remained in his castle. Now, as she approached the high table, she risked a glance upward. He was younger than she'd expected. Not young. No Lycan king could be young, not with the power required to hold a throne. But his face was unlined, his dark hair free of grey. He had the build of a warrior, broad-shouldered and powerful, but there was something almost tired in the way he sat, as if the crown on his head weighed more than it appeared. His eyes were fixed on something across the hall. He hadn't noticed her yet. Good. Perhaps she could pour his wine and retreat before he— "Your Majesty." Lord Varen's voice rang out, dripping with false respect. "I've brought you a gift. The daughter of Alpha Brennan, who so foolishly defied you. She serves me now, but I thought you might enjoy seeing her. Reduced circumstances." The hall went quiet. Sarah's hands shook so badly the wine sloshed against the sides of the pitcher. She kept her eyes down, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This was it. This was the moment the king would laugh at her, mock her, perhaps even strike her for her father's defiance. She heard him move, the scrape of his chair against stone, heavy footsteps approaching. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited for the blow. Instead, she felt warmth, large hands, gentle hands, closing over hers where they gripped the pitcher. "Give me that," a low voice said, not cruel, not mocking, almost kind. Her eyes flew open. The Lycan king stood before her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. He wasn't looking at the picture, he was looking at her, and on his face was an expression she couldn't name, something between shock and recognition and a fierce, barely contained emotion that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "When did you last eat?" She couldn't answer. Her voice had abandoned her. The king took the picture from her hands and set it aside. Then, to the audible shock of everyone in the hall, he removed his own cloak, fine black wool lined with silver fur, and draped it over her shoulders. "Varen?" His voice had changed. Gone was the quiet concern. In its place was something cold and dangerous. "You said she serves you?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Varen sounded uncertain now, as if he sensed he had miscalculated, but couldn't understand how. "She was part of the spoils from—" "She is no longer yours." The words fell like stones into still water. Sera's head snapped up. She stared at the king, uncomprehending. "Your Majesty." Varen's voice had gone thin. "I don't understand." "Then let me speak plainly." The king turned, and Sera saw the hall through his eyes for a moment. Hundreds of nobles, warriors, and servants, all frozen in place, watching this exchange with barely concealed shock. "This woman is under my protection. She will return to the castle with me tonight. Any claim you had on her is forfeit." But, Your Majesty, Are you arguing with me?" The question was soft, dangerous, the kind of soft that preceded violence. Varen went pale. "No, Your Majesty. Of course not. She's yours." "She's not yours to give." The king's voice was sharp now, cutting. "She was never yours. You took her from her home after slaughtering her family, and you thought I would laugh at her suffering?" He stepped forward, and Varen stumbled back. "You thought I would find pleasure in seeing an Omega broken and trembling." I thought—" "You thought wrong." The king turned back to Sera. His expression softened, though his jaw remained tight with barely controlled anger. He extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. "Come with me," he said quietly. "You don't have to serve anyone tonight. You don't have to serve anyone ever again." Sera stared at his hand. She didn't understand what was happening. This was the Lycan king, the man whose armies had destroyed her home, the man whose commander had killed her father. She should hate him. She did hate him. But his hand was steady, his eyes were kind, and for the first time in 3 months, someone was looking at her like she was a person instead of a thing. She didn't take his hand. She couldn't. Not yet. But she let him guide her away from Varen, away from the staring eyes, away from everything. And as she walked beside the Lycan king toward the doors of the great hall, wrapped in his cloak, she thought, what just happened? She didn't know. She couldn't understand. But for the first time since her world had ended, she felt something other than fear. The king's private wing of the castle was nothing like Lord Varen's cold, sparse quarters. Sera stood in the center of a room that was larger than the entire house she'd grown up in. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. Thick rugs covered the floor. The bed, enormous, draped in deep blue velvet, looked soft enough to drown in. She didn't move toward it. She didn't move at all. "These will be your rooms," the king said from the doorway. He hadn't entered. She noticed that. He was giving her space, staying on the threshold as if asking permission to cross into her territory. "There's a lock on the door, from the inside." She turned to look at him. In the softer light of the chamber, away from the grandeur of the great hall, he seemed less like a king and more like a tired man, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his shoulders. Why? The word came out rough, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had learned not to speak at Varen's. Speaking invited attention, and attention invited pain. Why what? Why any of this? She gestured at the room, at herself, at the impossible situation she found herself in. You don't know me. I'm the daughter of a man who defied you. I'm an Omega with nothing, no status, no wealth, no power. Why would you? Because you're my mate. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him. Her wolf, dormant for so long, stirred again. A flutter of recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. That's not possible, she whispered. I wish it weren't. He said it quietly, without malice, but the words still stung. When I saw you in that hall, shaking, terrified, wearing a servant's rags while that bastard Varen paraded you like a trophy. He stopped, took a breath. I knew. My wolf knew. You're mine. And I let you suffer for 3 months because I didn't know you existed. You let my father die. Yes. He didn't flinch from it, didn't make excuses. Your father refused to submit to the unified kingdom. He chose war. I didn't order his death specifically, but I gave the command that made it possible. I won't pretend otherwise. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. And now you expect me to, what? Fall into your arms? Be grateful? I expect nothing. He stepped back from the doorway, putting more distance between them. You owe me nothing, Sarah. Not gratitude, not affection, not forgiveness. What I did tonight, taking you from Varen, that wasn't a transaction. You don't have to pay for your safety with anything. Then what do you want? I want you to eat. He nodded toward a small table by the window, where she now noticed a tray of food had been laid out. Bread, cheese, sliced meat, a bowl of soup that steamed gently in the firelight. I want you to sleep in a real bed without fear. I want you to know that no one will touch you, hurt you, or command you. Not tonight. Not ever again. And in exchange? Nothing. His voice was firm. I told you. This isn't a transaction. She didn't believe him. She couldn't. 3 months with Varen had taught her that kindness always came with a price, that gentleness was just cruelty waiting for the right moment. But she was so hungry. She moved toward the table slowly, watching him the whole time, waiting for the trap to spring. He remained in the doorway, motionless, his expression unreadable. The soup was rich and warm. The bread was fresh. She ate too fast, her body desperate for nourishment, and had to force herself to slow down before she made herself sick. When she finally looked up, the king was still there, still watching. But not in the way Varen watched, not predatory, not calculating. He looked almost sad. You flinch, he said quietly. Every time I move, you flinch. What did he do to you? Does it matter? Yes. The simple answer caught her off guard. Why? Because I'm going to kill him for it. She should have been frightened by the cold certainty in his voice. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't known was there. He hit me, she said. The words came out flat, emotionless. She had learned to speak about her pain that way, as if it belonged to someone else. When I was too slow, or too clumsy, or when he simply felt like it. He kicked me once so hard I couldn't stand for 2 days. He told me I was worthless, that my father's defiance had earned me nothing but a life of suffering, that I should be grateful he kept me alive at all. The king's hands had curled into fists at his sides. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He also— She stopped. Some things were harder to say than others. He liked to remind me what he could do, what he had the right to do as my master. He never actually— She couldn't finish. I understand. The king's voice was rough. You don't have to say it. He made sure I knew it was coming, eventually, when he got bored of waiting. She met his eyes. And then you took me away. So I'm asking again. Why? What do you actually want from me? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost gentle. I want the chance to know you, not as a possession, not as a prize, as a person. I want to understand who you were before all of this, who you might become when you're not living in fear. He paused. And yes, I want you to be my mate, my queen. But not like this. Not when you're broken and terrified and have no real choice in the matter. So you'll wait? As long as it takes. And if I never choose you? If I can't get past what happened to my family? Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Resignation. Then I'll let you go. I'll give you money, protection, a home somewhere far from here. I won't force you to stay. You're the Lycan king? You could force me to do anything. Yes, he agreed. I could. But I won't. You've been forced enough, Sarah. Whatever happens between us, if anything happens at all, it will be your choice. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process kindness without conditions, patience without ulterior motives. It felt like a trap, but she couldn't see the teeth. I'm tired, she finally said. It was true. The exhaustion went bone deep, weeks and months of accumulated weariness she had never been allowed to address. The king nodded. Then sleep. I'll be in my chambers down the hall if you need anything. The servants know to bring you whatever you ask for. He turned to leave, then paused. My name is Kalen. You don't have to call me Your Majesty when we're alone. I don't know what to call you. Whatever feels right. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Good night, Sarah. He left, pulling the door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps fade down the corridor, and then silence. Sarah stood alone in the beautiful room, wrapped in a king's cloak, her stomach full for the first time in months. She walked to the door and tested the lock. It held firm. Then, slowly, she made her way to the bed. The mattress was impossibly soft. The blankets were warm and heavy. She curled into a ball in the center of it, still wearing the servant's dress, still not quite believing any of this was real. He had called her his mate. He had promised her choice. He had looked at her with something that might have been tenderness. She didn't trust it. She couldn't. But as sleep finally pulled her under, she realized that for the first time in 3 months, she wasn't dreading tomorrow. The nightmare came, as it always did. She was back in her village, watching it burn. Her father's body lay crumpled in the dirt, and Lord Varen stood over him laughing. But when Varen turned to look at her, his face shifted, melted, became something monstrous. A wolf made of shadow and fire, with eyes like empty pits. Did you think you could escape? The creature asked in Varen's voice. Did you think anyone would save you? She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The fire crept closer. The smoke filled her lungs. She opened her mouth to scream. Sarah! Sarah! Wake up! Her eyes flew open. She was sitting upright in bed, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears she didn't remember crying. The room was dark, except for the dying embers of the fire, and someone was crouched beside her bed. She flinched back, a whimper escaping her throat. "It's me. It's Kaelan." The voice was low, calm, deliberately unthreatening. "You were screaming. I heard you from the hall." Her breath came in ragged gasps. She couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, could only make out the broad shape of him, the faint gleam of his eyes. "I'm going to light a candle," he said. "Is that all right?" She managed a nod, though she wasn't sure he could see it. A moment later, warm light flickered to life. The king, Kaelan, sat back on his heels, keeping his distance. He was dressed simply, in a loose shirt and dark trousers. His feet were bare. He must have come running when he heard her. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked. She should say yes. She should send him away, lock the door, curl back into herself where it was safe. But the nightmare still clung to her like cobwebs, and the thought of being alone in the dark made her chest tight. "No," she whispered. "Stay, please." He nodded and settled into a chair near the bed, close enough to reach, but far enough to give her space. "Do you want to talk about it?" "It was just a dream. That wasn't what I asked." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The servant's dress she still wore was thin, and she shivered despite the lingering warmth of the blankets. Kaelan noticed. Without a word, he rose, retrieved a thick robe from the wardrobe, and held it out to her. He didn't approach, just extended his arm and waited for her to take it. She did. The robe was soft, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar. She wrapped it around herself and felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "I dream about the attack," she said quietly. "About my father, about Varen." She paused. Sometimes the dreams change things, make them worse. Tonight, Varen turned into something, a monster. "He is a monster. The dream wasn't wrong about that." "But you're not." The words surprised her. She hadn't meant to say them out loud. Kaelan went very still. "What makes you say that?" "A monster wouldn't sit in a chair at 3 a.m, waiting for a broken omega to stop shaking." She met his eyes. "A monster wouldn't have given me a lock on my door." "Sirah." "I hated you." The confession spilled out before she could stop it. "When they told me I was being sent to serve in the Lycan king's territory, I hated you with everything I had. You were the reason my father was dead, the reason my mother died of grief 3 days later, the reason my brother had to flee into the mountains. Every time Varen hurt me, I blamed you. I told myself that if I ever saw your face, I would find a way to kill you, even if it cost me my life." She expected him to be angry, to defend himself, or dismiss her, or punish her for admitting she had wanted him dead. Instead, he just nodded. "I know." "You know?" "I saw it in your eyes, in the Great Hall. The hate, the fury. You looked at me like you wanted to tear my throat out." A faint, sad smile crossed his face. "I can't say I blame you." "Doesn't that bother you? That your mate wanted to murder you?" "It bothers me that I gave you reason to." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. "I'm not a good man, Sarah. I've done terrible things in the name of unification. I've ordered armies to march, cities to fall, alphas to submit or die. Your father wasn't the first to choose death over surrender, and he wasn't the last." "Then why should I believe you're any different from Varen?" "Because Varen enjoyed it." His voice hardened. Varen took pleasure in cruelty, in breaking things weaker than himself. He used the war as an excuse to indulge his worst impulses. I never sanctioned what he did to you. I never even knew about it until tonight. Would it have mattered if you had? Yes. The word was fierce, absolute. If I had known that one of my commanders was torturing an Omega, any Omega mate or not, I would have had him executed. There are rules, even in war, lines that should never be crossed. Pretty words from a conqueror. I know. He didn't flinch from her accusation. I know how hollow it sounds. I can't undo what happened to your family. I can't bring your parents back or guarantee your brother's safety. All I can do is tell you the truth. I didn't want this. Any of this. I didn't want to be king, didn't want to spend my life forcing submission from people who just wanted to be left alone. But I inherited a fractured kingdom full of petty alphas tearing each other apart, and I made a choice. Unification or endless war. I chose unification. And my father paid the price. Yes, he did. And I will carry that weight for the rest of my very long life. He held her gaze, unflinching. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Sarah. I'm not even asking you to understand. I'm just asking you to see me clearly. Not as a monster, not as a saint, just as a man who made impossible choices and has to live with the consequences. She was quiet for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. The candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. My mother used to say that you could tell a man's character by how he treated those who couldn't fight back, she finally said. Varen treated me like I was nothing, less than nothing, like my pain was entertainment. And me? She looked at him, really looked, past the crown and the power and the armies. She saw the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself so carefully still, as if afraid any sudden movement might frighten her. You gave me a lock on my door, she said softly. You sat in that chair all night because I asked you to stay. You told me the truth even when it made you look like the villain. She swallowed. I don't know what that makes you, but I don't think you're a monster. Something shifted in his expression. The careful blankness cracked, and underneath she glimpsed raw, desperate hope. You're not broken, he said quietly. I need you to know that. Whatever Varen told you, whatever he made you believe, you're not worthless, you're not ruined, you're not less than anyone. You survived things that would have destroyed someone weaker. That makes you extraordinary, Sarah. Not broken. Never broken. Her eyes burned. She looked away, blinking rapidly, her throat tight. You don't know me. I'd like to. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and brushed his fingers against the back of her hand, where it rested on the blanket. The touch was feather-light, barely there. If you'll let me. She didn't pull away. They sat like that as the candle burned lower, his fingers warm against her skin, the silence between them no longer heavy, but something softer, something that felt almost like the beginning of trust. When she finally fell asleep again, he was still there. And this time, the nightmares didn't come. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of warm meals and soft beds and conversations that stretched late into the night. 2 weeks of Kaelin showing her the castle gardens, the library, the quiet corners where she could be alone when she needed it. 2 weeks of learning to exist without fear. Sierra had started to believe it might last. She was in the library when the messenger arrived, curled up in a window seat with a book of poetry, sunlight warming her face. She had discovered that she loved to read, now that she had time for it. Kaelin had noticed her lingering over the shelves and quietly arranged for new books to appear in her room each morning. She didn't hear the door open, didn't know anything was wrong until a shadow fell across her page. Well? Lord Varen's voice slithered into the peaceful silence. The little Omega has made herself comfortable. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She looked up slowly, her body already tensing, already preparing for pain. Varen stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his smile sharp and cruel. Two of his men flanked him, blocking the library's only exit. "Lord Varen!" She was proud that her voice didn't shake. "You're not supposed to be here." "I go where I please." He stepped closer, and she pressed herself back against the window. "The king may have stolen you from me at that feast, but he had no right. You were part of the spoils of war, legally claimed. I've come to petition for your return." "The king won't allow it." "The king isn't here." Varen's smile widened. "He rode out this morning to deal with a border dispute. Won't be back for days. Plenty of time for us to reconnect." Fear clawed at her throat. She thought of the lock on her door, the safety she had started to take for granted. None of it mattered if Kaelan wasn't here to enforce it. "The servants will tell him," she said. "The guards will do what they're told by a lord of the realm." Varen reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. His fingers dug into her skin, bruising. "Did you really think you could escape me? Did you think that one act of royal charity would change what you are?" She wanted to crumble, wanted to go small and silent and compliant, the way she had learned to survive. But something had changed in the past 2 weeks. Something had taken root in her chest, a stubborn, defiant spark that refused to be extinguished. "Let go of me," she said. Varen laughed. "Or what?" "Or I'll make you." She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe from the poetry books, full of heroines who refused to bend. Maybe from the conversations with Kaelan, who had looked at her like she was worth something. Maybe from the simple fact that she was tired, so deeply, completely tired, of being afraid. She grabbed the heavy book from her lap and swung it into the side of Varen's head. He stumbled back with a snarl of shock and pain. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. For one glorious moment, Sarah felt something like triumph. Then his fist connected with her cheek, and the world exploded into stars. She hit the floor hard, her vision swimming. Varen stood over her, his face twisted with rage. "You little bitch," he spat. "I was going to be gentle. I was going to give you a chance to come quietly. But now you're going to die." The voice came from the doorway, cold, flat, utterly without mercy. Sarah turned her head, her cheek throbbing, and saw Kaelan standing in the entrance to the library. He wasn't wearing his crown, wasn't wearing anything that marked him as king, but the power radiating off him was unmistakable. Ancient, terrible, barely contained. His eyes were fixed on Varen. They had turned gold, his wolf surging to the surface. "Your Majesty." Varen straightened, trying to regain his composure. "I was told you left for the border. I came back." Kaelan stepped into the room. His movements were slow, deliberate, predatory. "I felt something was wrong. My wolf wouldn't settle. So I turned around and rode through the night." His gaze dropped to Sarah, to the bruise already forming on her face, and something in his expression went terrifyingly blank. "And I find you here, touching what's mine." "She's not yours. She was never legally transferred." "She's my mate." The words were a growl, barely human. "She has been mine since the moment I saw her. And you—" He moved so fast Sarah barely saw it, One moment he was across the room. The next, he had Varen by the throat, lifting him off his feet. You put your hands on her. You hurt her. You came into my home to take her back to your hell. Varen clawed at Kaelin's grip, his face turning red. The council. The law. I am the law. Kaelin's voice was ice. And the law says that anyone who harms my mate dies. Slowly. Kaelin. Sierra's voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Kaelin turned to look at her, his eyes still gold, his wolf still raging. Don't kill him, she said. Something flickered across his face. Confusion. Hurt. After what he did to you, I know what he did. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain in her cheek. I lived it. Every day for 3 months. But if you kill him like this, in rage, without a trial, you become what he accused you of. A tyrant. A monster. She held his gaze. I don't want that. I don't want you to carry that weight because of me. For a long moment, Kaelin didn't move. The gold in his eyes warred with something else. Something human. Something that looked almost like love. Then, slowly, he lowered Varen to the ground. You're right, he said quietly. You're right. He turned to the guards who had followed him in. Take him to the dungeons. He'll stand trial for his crimes against the crown and against my mate. All of them. The guards dragged Varen away. He was shouting something, threats, protests, demands. But Sarah didn't hear any of it. She only saw Kaelin, crossing the room to kneel beside her, his hands hovering over her face like he was afraid to touch her. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have. You came back. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, the way she had imagined doing 100 times over the past 2 weeks. You felt something was wrong, and you came back. That's enough. It's not. It will never be enough. I want to give you everything, Sarah. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever hurts you again. Then do that. She leaned forward, her heart pounding. Stay with me. Choose me. And let me choose you. The kiss, when it came, was everything she had never dared to hope for. Gentle and fierce, tender and claiming. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, and she poured everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers, she whispered the words she had been afraid to speak. I choose you, Kaelin. I choose this. I choose us. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then you're mine, he said softly, and I'm yours, forever. The throne room had never been so full. Sarah stood at the entrance, her hand resting on the arm of Kaelin's most trusted advisor, waiting for the doors to open. Her gown was the color of moonlight, silver silk that caught the torchlight and shimmered with every breath. A delicate crown of white gold and sapphires sat atop her dark hair, marking her as what she was about to become. Queen, mate, equal. 3 months ago, she had walked into a great hall as a servant, trembling, expecting pain. Today, she would walk in as a bride, and the man waiting for her at the altar was the same one who had taken a wine pitcher from her shaking hands and wrapped her in his cloak. The doors swung open. The crowd turned to look at her. Hundreds of nobles, warriors, and dignitaries from across the unified kingdom. She heard gasps, whispers, the rustle of silk as people craned their necks to see the Omega who had captured the Lycan king's heart. But Sarah didn't see any of them. She only saw Kaelin. He stood at the front of the throne room, dressed in black and silver, his crown gleaming in the firelight. But it wasn't his finery that made her breath catch. It was his expression, the raw, unguarded wonder on his face as he watched her walk toward him. Like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Like he couldn't believe she was real. She reached the altar, and he took her hands in his. His fingers were warm, steady, anchoring her to the moment. "You're stunning," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "I don't have words." "You don't need them." The ceremony was ancient, steeped in tradition. They exchanged vows that spoke of partnership, of protection, of souls bound together across lifetimes. When the officiant asked if she came to this union of her own free will, Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do. I choose this. I choose him." Kaelin's hands tightened on hers. When it was his turn, he didn't just recite the traditional words. He added his own. "I vow to honor your strength," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "To never diminish your voice or your choices. To stand beside you, not above you. To love you not as a possession, but as my equal, my partner, my heart." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I have waited 300 years to find you, Sarah. I would wait 300 more." The marking came next, the sacred bite that would bind them together forever, visible proof of their bond. Kaelin tilted her head gently, exposing the curve of her neck. His lips brushed her skin, tender, asking permission even now. "Yes," she whispered. The bite was sharp, then warm, then something else entirely. A flood of emotion that wasn't her own. His love, his devotion, his fierce protective instinct, all of it pouring into her through the bond. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of what he felt for her. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you," he said. "I should have told you sooner. I should have told you every day." "Tell me now." "I love you." He kissed her forehead. "I love you." Her cheek. "I love you." Her lips, soft and sweet. "I will never stop telling you." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Sarah barely heard them. She was too busy kissing her husband, her mate, her king. The feast that followed was magnificent. Music and dancing, wine flowing freely, laughter echoing off the stone walls. Sarah sat beside Kaelin at the high table, her hand in his, marveling at how different this felt from the last time she had been in this hall. It was near midnight when the commotion started. The doors burst open, and a group of people were escorted in by the royal guards. Sarah recognized them instantly, though she had hoped never to see their faces again. Her uncle, her aunt, her cousins. The family who had sold her to Lord Varin as payment for a debt, who had laughed when she begged them not to send her away. They looked terrified now. "Good. Your Majesties." Her uncle fell to his knees, his face pale. "We came as soon as we heard. We had no idea. We never imagined that the niece you discarded like garbage would become queen." Kaelin's voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "How unfortunate for you." "We were deceived," her aunt said quickly. "Lord Varin told us she would be treated well. We never knew—" "You never cared." Sarah spoke for the first time, and her family flinched at the steel in her voice. "You knew exactly what kind of man Varin was. You knew what he would do to me. And you sent me anyway because I was just an Omega, and Omegas don't matter." "Sarah, please." "My name is Queen Sarah." She stood, and her family shrank back. and you will address me as such." The silence in the hall was absolute. Every eye was fixed on her, watching, waiting. "I could have you executed," she said calmly, "for selling a member of the royal bloodline into slavery, for conspiracy against the crown. Kaelin would do it gladly if I asked." She glanced at her mate, who gave a small, confirming nod. "But I won't." Her uncle sagged with relief. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't," she continued, "because I want you to live. I want you to go back to your lands and watch me thrive. I want you to see me happy, powerful, loved, and know that you could have had my favor, my protection, my gratitude. And instead you have nothing." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Let that be your punishment. Let it haunt you for the rest of your miserable lives." Her family was escorted out in disgrace, their protests falling on deaf ears. As the doors closed behind them, Sarah felt something release in her chest, a weight she had carried since the day they betrayed her, finally lifting. Kaelin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That was magnificent. I learned from the best." 1 year later, Sarah stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun rise over the kingdom that was now hers to protect. So much had changed. Varen had been tried and executed for his crimes, his lands redistributed to those he had wronged. Her brother had been found alive in the mountains and now served as an advisor in the court, his quick mind finally given room to flourish. The unified kingdom was at peace, its people prospering under a king who ruled with strength and a queen who ruled with compassion. And in Sarah's arms, wrapped in a blanket of softest wool, was the newest member of the royal family, a daughter, perfect and tiny, with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin. Kaelin appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around them both. "You should be resting." "I wanted to watch the sunrise." She leaned back into his warmth. "I used to dread mornings. Now I can't wait for them." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I love you." "I know." She smiled, tilting her head to look at him. "I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, bathing the kingdom in golden light. An Omega who had been sold as punishment, now a queen. A king who had been feared as a conqueror, now beloved as a protector. And between them, a love that had begun with a wine pitcher and a cloak, and had grown into something unbreakable. The best stories, Sarah thought, don't end with happily ever after. They begin with it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more Lycan King romances. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and let us know in the comments which tropes you want to see next.